Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webinar on levels. What's in it for building renovations, where you can learn how the EU framework for sustainable buildings, which is levels, can benefit adaptable new construction or major renovation projects. We're very happy to have people joining us today for this webinar. We are expecting quite a few more people, so we're just going to wait a couple more seconds for everybody to join us before we then kick off. And then we'll have a webinar for 90 minutes lasting until 11:30. So please just get yourself comfortable and grab your coffee, and we will start in a minute. For those joining, welcome. We're just connecting people for the webinar today, and we will start in just a few seconds. Now, I think people are still coming in. Nevertheless, I would suggest that we're starting. My name is Katerina Faraj. I am going to be moderating today's webinar, and I'm going to be joined by a group of very skilled and experienced speakers that will share their experiences and information with us. We have a few logistical announcements just there to make. The first one is that, as you've probably realized when entering this webinar, your cameras and microphones have been turned off by default. This is simply because this is a webinar style where we would like the interaction to happen through the chat. So please locate the chat box for you so you can ask questions and put comments towards the speakers through the chat. Also, if there are any technical problems, please do reach out to my colleagues from the organizing team. You can do that via the email address levelsevents@echoris.com. So that will also provide it to you in the chat, just in case you're experiencing any difficulties technically. And then, as you've also noted from joining, we are recording this webinar because we want to make it available. If you want to stay anonymous, please do not put comments into the chat because these will be visible. Now, with all of these logistics aside, again, a very warm welcome to today's webinar. We have prepared a really nice agenda for you. So please, if you take a look at that, we'll have two blocks with the first part where we have an introductory presentation explaining how levels works and how it could actually help reaching higher sustainability performance of buildings. Then in part two, we have three speakers that will look into three different contexts, renovation contexts, where levels can actually play a role. Our first speaker will actually look into when renovation is a chosen strategy, what can you then do with it? The second speaker will look into if there's an existing asset, how to make a decision to either renovate, demolish, or rebuild. And the third speaker looks into a new build design and the planning for future renovation possibilities. We have after each presentation or at the end of each part, we have space for questions and answers. So again, I encourage you to please put your questions and comments in the chat. We will then bundle them and try to address as many as we can in the Q&A sessions at the end of each part. Before we kick off, we do have a little poll that we would like to put towards you. Some of you have maybe already answered this question during registration phase, which is great. But of course, we would also like to hear from everybody. So even if you've answered the question already earlier, please do so again. And you do that by joining Slido. You can scan the QR code, which is on your screen, or you can follow the link that is going to be provided in the chat. You get to the Slido tool, and then you can also go in and answer the question. Now, for that question we have for you is, how familiar are you with levels? You have many answer options, and you can pick more than one. The answer options are: I participated in the testing phase or stage. I'm looking into how to apply it, or I'm applying the framework now. I have attended previous levels events. I have looked at the manuals. I have looked at the website. I received the newsletter. I'm a member of the LinkedIn group. I am completely new to levels, which is absolutely great if we have also these newcomers to the topic. And I have checked out the e-learning or e-CAT tool. So please take a moment to respond to the questionnaire or to the Slido poll. online. And then in just a few seconds, we will look at the results. Could we have the results, please? Wonderful. So here you have the question again, where we can see the different answer options. And the question is, how familiar with levels are you? And we see some answers coming in. That's really good. I see a lot of action happening. Wonderful. And there are a few that are new to levels. That's great. There is going to be introduction and more information in just a few minutes. There seem to be a lot of people that have looked at manuals or the website or the LinkedIn page. So very good. Yeah, I see quite a number of people have responded. I'm still going to leave it open for just a bit of time. While I'm also going to let you know that, of course, in the registration, you also expressed interest in related topics related to the topic of today's webinar, especially linking it with decarbonization and certification. And I just want to point out that these two topics have been covered in previous webinars. So, and these are still available. You can look at the recordings. And also my colleagues in the background, they will post the links to those recordings in case you're interested. So we have covered these topics or the link to decarbonization and certification in other events. So if you are interested in them, please follow the links that are provided in the chat now. Now, looking at the question in front of us, how familiar you are, I think we have sort of a final score. Seemingly, a lot of people have received the newsletter and have also looked at the website. Many are a member of the LinkedIn group, which is always a great idea because then you get really first-hand information and also really much in real time almost. And we also see some are returning because they have been attending previous levels events, which is great because each levels event, of course, touches a slightly different topic. So it's great that you're joining us again. And we have about a fifth that are newcomers. So welcome to the world of levels. And we're really looking forward to sharing information with you today. Wonderful. Thank you all for answering that little icebreaker question and for being available for today's webinar. We're going to kick off now part 1 of the webinar with a presentation from Josephina Lindblom, who is Policy Officer for Sustainable Buildings at DG Environment and has been one of the masterminds, at least, behind the development of it and has been part of the journey of levels for many years. Josephina is our star in introducing the topic in all of our online events, and she's going to give us the honor today as well to do that. So Josephina, the floor is yours, and we're looking forward to your introduction.
Thank you so much. Thanks for organizing this again. It's always a pleasure to join those webinars. I think some of you have already been part of others, and others today are new. So a very warm welcome to all of you. It's my task to introduce levels to all of you so that you have a feeling for what it is actually about, and then we will hear more specific presentations later on today's topic on renovation. So if I could have the next slide, please. So levels is a common language. We have developed it as such. It is based on best practice industry standards. So we are using what we find useful out there. And these indicators have been developed and also tested together with large numbers of building professionals in the sector. Now, levels is a methodology to assess and report on sustainability performance of buildings. We look at both residential and offices. With that, we cover the most part of buildings. We look at both new buildings and renovation projects. So levels can be used for both new buildings and for renovation projects. And today, of course, we're focusing on renovation. It was conceived and it is really an entry-level tool for the mainstream market. So that levels provides the methodology to assess and report on sustainability. It means that even if you are not used to consider too much these kinds of questions from your previous work, levels should really be there to guide you to take those first steps, to look at the most essential aspects of sustainability performance of a building. Next slide, please. So yeah, I wanted to stress that levels is sort of used in different ways. Now, the blue part here, the building assessments, is really to say that anyone can pick up this voluntary tool and use the indicators that interest them for their particular project and work with them as they wish, as the methodology sets out. But you can choose. I will soon show you the indicators that we have, and you can sort of pick and choose in the way that you see would be most useful for your project. However, we also see how these levels indicators are impacting policy. So you may be aware of that there is a revision ongoing on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. You may have heard of the Sustainable Finance Initiative with its taxonomy. And in those kinds of policy initiatives, they are basing themselves to a large extent on levels indicators when they are bringing in life cycle aspects and circularity and so on into these policies. So levels is already influencing policy for sure. Moreover, we see how many of the biggest certification schemes active in the EU. First of all, they were part of developing levels and testing levels when that took place a couple of years ago, but they are also now aligning their different certification schemes and their indicators to a large extent also with the levels ones. So there's three different ways in which, at least, in which levels has an impact now on the building performance. Next slide, please. Yes, so these are the 6 different areas in which levels has indicators. We call these 6 areas macro objectives, but perhaps that's not necessary to know. But in these 6 different areas, we have a couple of indicators then. So we identified first these areas, these macro objectives, where we thought that it would be really important that levels could provide guidance. So it's whole life carbon. So obviously it's the energy used during the full life cycle of the building and the carbon emissions that give rise to. It is resource efficient material flows. That's where we have indicators related to circularity and efficient use of water. So these 3 are really areas where we look at environmental performance directly, you could say. Then we have 3 different areas which are more linked to the quality and the value of the building. So it's health and comfort, adaptation and resilience to climate change, and life, cost, and value. So in these 6 areas, we have our indicators. And on the next slide, then, we will see the indicators. So here again, you can see the second column there are indeed the 6 macro objectives I just showed you. So you have the greenhouse gas emissions along the full life cycle, and the material use, water, etc. And then to the right of that, you see the different indicators. You see that in some cases, such as in the water case in macro objective 3, there's only one indicator. While in, for example, the one on material use, macro objective 2, we have more. So it varies. But it's really those indicators which are there to guide an assessment in a project directly. And one can choose, as long as levels is voluntary, which it is now, one can choose the indicators that one wants to work with. It suits best for your either new build project or renovation project. So if I could have the next one, please. Yes, very important to be aware of when it comes to levels is that one can use the indicators at 3 different levels indeed. So the first level is when you work with the indicator at concept stage, and then it's mainly a qualitative assessment that you're doing. Many of the indicators there, we provide like checklists that you can work with to check if you've been considering the different aspects of your very initial thinking of the project. So that's level 1. That is really to steer the conversation between the client and the design team. And then at level 2, you are working with the indicators of your choice during the design and construction, and then they become much more quantitative, of course. At the 3rd level, that is at the handover of the building. So there we're looking at the real performance, so not design performance, but real performance. And in some cases, as you can imagine, some indicators, it's also about monitoring the actual performance during the first year of the building, of the occupation of the building, I should say. Okay, next one, please. So I understood that many of you have already had a look at the Levels website. That's great. I hope you find it useful. For those who are new, I just want to stress that we have step-by-step introduction under those boxes that you can click on. We also have a very nice e-learning training facility, which we are very proud of, which you can find on the website as well, which really takes you step by step through the different, well, first of all, it presents Levels more thoroughly than what we do on the website directly. It presents the overall thinking of Levels, and then it goes through each and every indicator in a very nice way. And it also provides a case study at the end for each indicator. We have a calculator which can help you to structure and sort of set up your assessment. And of course, we have the user manuals, which are the backbone of Levels, which are quite dense documents, which explains in very great detail how to work with the different indicators. There's more information than that on the website, but those are the key aspects. But you will also find lots of you can find a link to our newsletter, to our LinkedIn group, and also to different publications, great fact sheets as well, for example, which I will come to in just a second. So there are lots of things which are available there. Next slide, please. So I wanted to stress a very new fact sheet that we have, which you can find on our website then, on the Levels website, which is exactly on renovation. So it's very timely. And we have it in different languages as well. Not all languages, but in many. So please have a look. It goes through how Levels can support renovation in different aspects. So I think you will like that. There is a very nice case study at the end, which I wanted to stress already here, which is done by a company called Fern, which did an office renovation for a big French innovation company in Paris, this was. And they sensed that the flexible nature of Levels made it really possible for them to adapt its application of this framework to their specific needs. So that's really what we wanted when we developed Levels. They also felt that it provided guidelines to them to guarantee traceability and reliability in what they were doing. And again, that is really something that we were targeting. So that's great to hear. So please have a look at this fact sheet and see how they went about and other aspects. Just to say that they really used most of the Levels indicators which were relevant to their office space renovation, which they sensed were in macro objectives 1 to 4. So that would mean 1 is the energy use and the carbon emissions. 2 is the use of materials. Macro objective 3 is on water, and macro objective 4 is on health and comfort. So they felt that most of the Levels indicators in those areas were indeed relevant for their renovation project as well. Next one, please. So we also often get questions, and actually we got them also in many of you asked for this when you registered. You could put in what you expected from this webinar today. We're not providing you with case studies as such today, but we are aware of that there is a great interest case studies based on real building projects. Where users then share their experience. And so we are working on that. We have a live project which is just starting this spring, which will use 10 building projects, which will be using Levels. They will be having, within those 10 building projects, they will have new buildings, renovation, and also existing buildings. And they look at different kinds of buildings spread out across the EU. They will use these indicators result as well as experience from their process will be used by us to publish material after the live project, so that we get their results and their feedback and their experience, so that we then can provide really insightful case studies for you. But this will take a few years because, as you know, a building project takes a few years, and we're doing this really based on real building projects. But don't feel that you need to wait to get going with levels until that is done. We will be keeping you updated along the project. They will share their experience as they go along, and we will do so in different ways. And of course, there is a lot of material already to use to get going with levels. But this is something that is happening, and I wanted to share it with you today as well. Okay, next one. So these are the key benefits of levels. This is a little bit of a repetition. It is a common language which uses best practice industry standards. We track performance throughout the full life cycle, which is really important, we believe, and we are looking at both new buildings and renovation projects. It enhances the dialogue between stakeholders, and it supports sustainability skills and understanding in the whole team of different kinds of building professionals. And we also, as I mentioned, we also see how it already starts to underpin future EU, but actually also national policies. So regardless if you're working in design and execution, or in planning, policy making, or in finance for that matter, levels is really for you. And with that, I believe I'm done. Next slide to check that I haven't made a mistake in that. No, exactly. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Josefina, for that presentation. And I already saw that there are quite some comments or questions in the chat. And maybe we kick off with this one because I think you already mentioned this in your presentation, but just to be sure and clear, there's a question in the chat, which is levels intended also for other public buildings, such as schools, kindergartens, cultural buildings? What about those?
Yeah, very good question indeed. So yes, we started off considering residential buildings and offices. That was really our focus. But during the test phase of levels, which took place a few years ago, there were several instances when building projects for schools and kindergarten used the indicators and used them in the way they were set up for offices, and that worked very well. So in that sense, we would say this has proven to work really well. And moreover, I can say that colleagues of mine in the Commission, they are now working to revise the existing green public procurement criteria, which the Commission has for buildings. And they are basing it now on levels, because we have those indicators now. And there they will also make sure that the guidance that they give from these green public procurement criteria are also focusing on schools and kindergarten. But it is a sign of that we believe that the levels indicators work really well for them as well. I would not say that they would, we have not tried them and we have not conceived them for buildings such as warehouses or retail or hospital, for example. That's a very different kind of buildings. So there I would feel much less certain to recommend it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They are quite different in the way they're designed, but also used.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Please keep also further questions coming if you want Josefina to answer them. But maybe just to put one in there as well is following up a little bit on, of course, what you presented, but what would be the added value for an organization to use levels?
Well, I think it's, as I said in one of my slides, levels is now being sort of used in different ways, right? We see how it already starts to impact policy and certainly certification as well. But even if policy is not that there to push a project, or you're not interested in certification, the way levels was conceived from the very beginning was really to provide something for the mainstream market, which is not used to consider sustainability performance a lot in any case. And the great thing with levels is that you can choose the indicators that you're interested in. You can choose the level which you want to work on. You don't have to do all the levels. You can start with level 1 and work with in this more quantitative way in the beginning. And it really gets you going. It helps you because it's a vast world out there of sustainability aspects, and it's very difficult to know what exactly would be our main points and how do we do it. Levels really tries to guide a user to consider the most important aspects, and doing so gradually. Let's say first with, as I said, we work with checklists in the very beginning at the first level. So you really get your team together and understand what kind of conversations are needed and what are the thoughts you need to have. And then you can build up on that. You can choose that some of the indicators you've been discussing at level 1, you may want to continue at level 2, etc. So it gives an enormous amount of flexibility, which still gives a lot of understanding and skills, I think, in the end.
Oh, great. Yeah, absolutely. There was also a very specific question in the chat, which is in which languages the levels e-learning would be available.
Yes, so Almudena, who will talk later, can correct me if I'm wrong when it's her turn, but I would say that it is in English, of course, French, German, Italian, Polish, and Spanish. Those are the languages we have for the time being. I hope I'm right when I'm saying that. Otherwise, she will tell you differently when she comes along, because she's been working on actually setting this up. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Amadena, if there's anything that you want to add later, please do so. But it seems to be quite a spread there, also in terms of different languages across the EU. And then maybe also looking at the obviously the specific topic of today's webinar. How does levels function in renovation projects? So, is there a point to assess, for example, whole life carbon in those projects as well?
Yeah, so in the user manuals where the levels methodology is set out, there's always a section on renovation as well, and specific considerations to be made if different to new builds for each indicator. It doesn't have to be different at all, but it can be. So then it stresses that. And actually in the e-learning that we have, there's also a very nice commentary at the end about what are the potential differences that you might consider if you're working on a renovation project. But in general, all the indicators are relevant, but they can be slightly more or less depending on a new building project. Then you brought up the question on whole life carbon, and of course, if you're doing a renovation project, you would then. I think it's very important to look at the carbon emissions, both embodied, as we call them, and operational carbon. But you would, of course, have to do it from the point where you are then. You are not expected to, if you have a renovation project, like the one I mentioned with the French insurance firm, they had a great interest in looking at the carbon emissions, both from the material use and then when they were heating and cooling the building. But of course, they didn't go back to look at what were these emissions before, when we built the building maybe 30 years ago. That's past, that we don't expect a user to look at, but you look at what's happening now and what you project for the future. And based on that, you still have different design options, most likely, for your renovation. And then you can decide what would be best based on the criteria that you set yourself. So for sure, there's a lot for renovation as well.
Great. I take that as the final point for this round of discussion, Josephina, because I think it gives a really nice, smooth transition to the next part, the second part of our webinar. So thank you so much, Josephina, for now, and for also having given us this great presentation as an introduction to levels. We're moving into the second part, which is the part on using levels for building renovation. So again, as Josephina has highlighted, there is quite a lot already existing in the manuals and in the tools and the help tools to guide also renovation projects. And we want to now hear in the next 3 presentations, we're going to do one after the other then after the third presentation, we have again time for questions and discussion. We have 3 presentations focusing on different major renovation contexts and how that links obviously to levels. So we have Evangelina Bektas-Yadou, who talks about when renovation is the chosen strategy as the very first presentation. This will be then followed by Lisette van Doorn, who addresses how for an existing asset you can take or make a decision to either renovate, demolish, or rebuild. So a very important decision moment as well, where levels can help. And in a third presentation, Almudena Rodera will talk about the detailed planning for renovation, of course, in the link to levels. We start with the very first one, and I already saw Evangelina to be online. So welcome to today's webinar. We're very happy for you to give us this interesting presentation about a deep renovation and extension building project from your own experience with the JRC. So Evangelina, your floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Katerina, for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Can I have the next slide, please? So during this presentation, I will try to debrief you on the implementation of levels, level 2 phase that we're running now for our building project. So I would like to quickly present you our building project. This is the conference building at the Joint Research Center at the Kiel site, and it has more than 40 years old presence. So we really had to take some serious decisions. For us, it was essential, and it still is, to update the building's energy performance and facilities. We wanted to host additional functionalities as these were requested and identified by staff through a co-creation exercise. And we wanted to adapt the building to current and future needs. Next one, please. Next one, please. Thank you. Since the beginning of the project, the chosen strategy for us was to implement a major deep renovation. Total demolition was not at all an option for us because we didn't want to start a new building from scratch. We wanted to minimize the environmental footprint of a total new building, and we also wanted to support the European Green Deal. There was one more reason, an additional reason. We wanted to preserve the dominant presence of these buildings at the JRC hillside. We also wanted an extension to house the additional functionalities as identified by staff. So the goal since the beginning have been to have a sustainable and cost-efficient design approach. We wanted to assess the sustainability by using the levels framework. For us, it was an internal European Commission tool, and we wanted to walk the talk basically. We wanted to co-create and co-design with identified stakeholders the whole project, and to align with the new European Bauhaus initiative, which was launched parallel to the beginning of the project, because we wanted this building to be beautiful, sustainable, and inclusive to all. Next one, please. So in our project, you can meet the 3 renovation contexts we briefly described before, which can be potentially valuable. So we can meet the 3 renovation contexts of levels, because having a renovation as a chosen strategy for this green, you can see these green volumes on the plan. These are the parts that we decided that they will be renovated, and we have to assess the sustainability performance of different renovation options. Having also an existing asset building, which is just to let you know, it's the green part and the yellow part is the existing basically building. We had to structure justifications towards a major renovation or demolition or partial demolition. And we also had to carefully consider the life cycle of the whole building, because we want to add an extension which can bring together the volumes that we want to renovate. We wanted to consider the life cycle of the whole building, as we were interested in future adaptation and also in low maintenance costs. Next one, please. Concentrating in the renovation decisions, the levels framework helped us a lot to take decisions, to brainstorm, to lead decisions on environmental design choices. together with the stakeholders, our architects, archipelago architects, our engineers, tractable, but also with people from the academia. We had on board University of Leuven. We also had VITO, the Flemish Institute of Technological Research, and Socotec. We have been a really multidisciplinary team, and the levels framework to help us to set priorities and to take decisions. However, we took a little bit, we differentiate ourselves at some points, because we made an analysis using other methodologies in order to prioritize our needs. And we wanted to have a quantitative assessment on selected elements types. So we examined a few build-ups of walls, floors, and roofs in order to find the best design option in a co-creative way. What we did actually a little bit different with the levels from framework at the moment is that we used levels on element level. So we use it per square meter instead of the building as a whole. Of course, we will report back in the levels reporting format, but for this stage, in order to take the design decisions, for us it was important to do so in a co-creative way, and also to make these decisions a little bit in a faster way. Next one, please. I'm not going to go into detail on this table. It is a table showing the focus with a focus on insulation of existing walls. The first row, you can see the existing wall that we want to renovate is a cavity wall dating back 40 years. And below, you can see only one of the options that we have been discussing with the stakeholders to renovate this wall by keeping the internal skin and basically adding insulation and adding a new external skin. And then you can see on this table, you can see how the indicators of the life cycle of the life cycle analysis, also the U values, how this change, and these build-ups actually it helped us a lot to take decision, because we actually, based on these different scenarios, we brainstorm a lot on which are the best scenarios for the design approach. Next one, please. Yes, this is a follow-up a few graphs to show that if the first column, for example, is the wall, 1 square meter of the wall, or the wall itself now, then by applying different build-ups and by renovating this wall, we can see that we have a reduction of the total environmental impact. We also score better for the global warming, and also we can these are the table below for the LCC. You can see also that by choosing different build-ups, you can adjust, you can take decisions according to the priorities that you set. Here is at the right bottom corner, you can see a table, and basically it is the renovation and extension approach compared to a new building. And you can see already that we have a winner that's with the renovation and applying the levels methodology in order to take decisions. We managed to save 32% of the initial cost estimation, but we also have savings to the indicators that we to few indicators that we examined. For example, for the indicator 6.1 for the LCA, and also for the global warming, we score a little bit because it's an extension and renovation. We also have nice scores. Next one, please. So what's the message that we would like to pass and what we have learned? For us, Levels was a clear framework to orient environmental design choices with the project team in a collaborative way. We use also the national calculation methods for Belgium that was taught them in order to optimize the total environmental impact and to deliver results. And at the moment, we're investigating how to develop a formula for the whole project to take our final design decision decisions with a balance between environmental and investment cost. But also as an architect and as a client, I would like to add that we're also interested in the other indicators about the well-being and about the environmental, internal environment, and so about the look and feel and the content of the building. Thank you very much for your attention. I think I made it on time, Katarina.
Yes, you absolutely did. Thank you so much, Evangelia. Please stay with us, of course, because there are comments and questions coming into the chat, which we will address after the third presentation. So thank you for now, and we see each other back in just a few minutes. We'll now turn to the second presentation, again, a different context in which levels can be used in the decision-making and design around renovation projects. And in this case, we hear from Lisette van Doorn from the Urban Land Institute, where it is the question that there is an existing asset and you have to decide whether you go for a renovation, demolishment, or rebuild. So, Lisette, we're very interested to hear from your perspective how that decision process is going and how levels can actually help with that. I can see you, Lisette. I hope you can also talk to me. Yes.
I hope so.
Yes, I hear you perfectly. Then the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Katarina. Thank you for the invitation. Next slide, please. Just briefly to understand the perspective I'm taking, a few words on Urban Land Institute. We're a global network of professionals in real estate from across public and private sectors, focused on knowledge sharing and best practice sharing, as many of us work very locally and we try to kind of prevent reinventing the wheel. We have almost, next slide please, over 50,000 members, and we identified 3 mission priorities a couple of years ago, and I want to stress especially the first one, focused on decarbonization. So this topic is very relevant for the work we do, and I thought, next slide please, and then keep going to the next one. Yes, next one. And then I thought, to understand where levels can fit in, it's very important to understand all the other factors that building owners need to take into consideration to make that decision between either rebuild, demolish, or reuse and renovate or repurpose. And obviously, probably all of you have seen these figures. There's such a huge pressure to focus on reuse and renovate, given that 85% of the buildings that currently exist will still be there in 2050. And the built environment is responsible for such a big part of the total carbon emissions globally. So it is a very important, but the reality that this is common knowledge and everyone acts like it is not yet there. Next slide, please. Because there are many different factors impacting that decision to renovate or rebuild. And I'll quickly run through each of these in the next couple of slides. First of all, occupier demand, regulation and reporting requirements, net zero targets that companies have, and finally, the financial impact. Next slide, please. Looking first at occupier demand, what we see, this is based on research we recently did with the Instant Group, that over the short term, and look at the orange bars, it's all about cost reduction and getting people back to the office. This is focused on offices only, but we see similar patterns elsewhere. So, and the environmental side, especially for occupiers, is much lower on the agenda right now. If we look 5 years ahead, that becomes a little bit better, but still occupiers are mostly concerned about how to attract talent. Sustainability plays a role in that. But also with occupiers, we see that there's a lot more to worry about than their buildings. Often, for especially manufacturers, are focused on their core processes, much less focus on their buildings. While the built environment is responsible for 40% in total of carbon emissions, for them it's only a very minor part. We see more awareness of that with landlords, but still almost all is around the operational performance of the building. You see a total focus on reduction of overall costs. So the energy cost is an important part of that. Next slide, please. If we then zoom in on the environmental factors that are of importance, we see a large dominance for both occupiers and landlords on that operational performance of the building. So how much energy does it use? Predominantly, if it uses energy, it's predominantly preferred renewable. There's much less focus on the embodied carbon side of it. It's the fifth bar, you see buildings with lower embodied carbon. That is much lower on the agenda. It's a little bit more for landlords, but not so much for occupiers yet. Next slide, please. So what you can conclude from this, a huge need for education and transparency. And that's also where Levels, I think, has an important role to play. If we then look at where what else is the industry having to deal with, it's a lot. There's a lot of regulations that are focused on environmental and also social and governance elements that landlords, owners have to report according to. And also I saw a question in the chat, the link to building certifications. There are a lot. We see a strong shift from focus to, say, the building capabilities, how's the building isolated and all of that, to the actual measurement of carbon emissions, energy use, so the actual environmental performance of the building. We see those standards shifting to that. And the other point, next slide, please. The other point I want to make is with the different regulations coming at different levels, if we zoom into that, it's a lot. Where, again, cities have all their own regulations. For example, in New York, there's a local law that if your building emits more than a certain level of carbon emissions, you get fined. What seems to work really well in Europe is where cities kind of in their planning policies put in far more stricter retrofit only planning policies. We see it now in London, in Brussels, for example. Other cities are still debating whether that's the right solution. Country level, we see more EPCs, again, only focused on operational performance. And then on the EU level, for example, we have the EU taxonomy and SFDR, with, to be honest, SFDR not really helping that embodied carbon focus and that transition because it rewards what's already green. Next slide, please. Let's then quickly zoom in on net zero targets. So the targets that companies have set when they want to become net zero. And what you there see is it's quite a large percentage. This is recent research from BizNow. Almost 40%, I think, of 75 companies looked at globally have no target whatsoever. There's only a very small part, 16%, that both include embodied carbon, so what's in the construction, transport, what's needed to build or renovate the building, and also the tenant emissions. So the part that the tenant has rented is often not included because they are responsible for their own energy supply. And we see another 15, 16% that do include tenant emissions, but not embodied, and only 28% includes both. Next slide, please. And then we look at how real estate is being valued. And what you see now is that the cost of, say, doing nothing, in not transitioning your buildings or renovating them, upgrading them to environmental standards is included in a real estate valuation. With only, say, scattered regulation present, there's no real push for building owners to take the responsibility and to act on that. And then where we see, because there seems to be evidence that you can ask higher rents if you have an energy efficient building. But that is often blurred with location and age of the building. Those are often the newer buildings. And then those are the strong tenants who can pay a higher rent. So at this moment, this is all not very encouraging for focusing on whole life carbon assessments and over the building life cycle. And that's why we need more tools to help us to get there and raise the awareness within the industry that this is really important. Next slide, please. So this gets me to the conclusion that I think a tool like Levels is extremely helpful, but it needs to be put in perspective with all the other things that are there. And I think raising the awareness, and especially with kind of different levels that you can start with, not the need to do everything from day one, I think is extremely helpful. I think what would be really helpful is to also have a financial impact assessment in that. I do want to stress, however, that the tool does not change the business case. It can help that level of transparency, but a lot more across the industry is needed to kind of get a dominant focus on renovation. And one last thing I would like to say is embodied carbon. I think those case studies are extremely helpful for people to see what the impact can be and how you can do these kind of things. And then collectively as an industry, the more data we collect, for example, especially on the embodied carbon side, is extremely helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisette, for that presentation, and again for a different perspective. We're looking forward to have you back later for the Q&A session, Lisette. But for the moment, thank you so much for the presentation. Now, we have a third presentation for you in a yet different context in relation to Levels and renovation. And this time it's about planning for a new build. And we have Almudena Rodero, who is associated with ARUP, and she's going to have that presentation. Just want to remind everybody, please put your questions in the chat. Also, maybe mark to whom you want to put your question forward. And after Almudena's presentation, we will then have a round of questions with all three speakers of the second part. Almudena, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Katerina. Thanks for the introduction and give me the opportunity to participate again in this webinar. Well, next slide, please. Well, when you are starting with the design of a building, it's key to have a long-term view of the whole life of the building and integrate aspects that could help the future renovation. In this case, sometimes the client has the objective of this future adaptation in mind with low cost and also having a high sustainability impact. The first step using Levels is to set up the Levels plans for the project and take care of the different considerations of the building to a better understanding of the context. I mean the location and climate, the building type, how the building will be used, and the building model and characteristics. Next slide, please. You have a different setup of batteries of different indicators and aspects that you could consider. So in this case, in order to have this adaptation and low cost and high sustainability impact, we should focus in materials and resources efficiency, optimize life cycle cost, adaptation and resilience, and then in order to reduce the impact, to improve energy performance, efficient use of water resources, and healthy and comfortable spaces. Next slide, please. In order to integrate this adaptability in the design and also in the considering the future renovation, it is important to consider different aspects related to this adaptability. Oversized circulation areas to facilitate higher use and support future additions, design a structural system that can withstand the increased loads that could be, in the future, and different design aspects that could be included when you are choosing the different materials. Use modular systems, standard design elements, and integrate solutions such as plug and play lighting, accessible floor systems, so that the different spaces could be moved and reconfigured without alterations of the building systems. And also specify products with integral labels. This will help in the future to identify which are the materials of the building, so this could be reused in the future. Next slide, please. Another consideration for this, having in mind this future renovation, is the design for the construction. This long-term view could help to integrate design measures that could help this objective in the future. For example, integrate in the selection of materials the ones that could enable the separation of elements. For example, independent and easily separable building elements, easy of access to connection, and mechanical and reversible connections instead of adhesives or using other types of assemblies. Thinking the building as a material banks, giving the opportunity to include in this building information system which are the materials that are incorporated in the building could help to reuse in the future, as you know, which are the different elements that you have in your building, like a material passport. Fully understand the building operation is very important to understand which are the elements that you are incorporating in the design and during construction, so that in the future the renovation is easier, as you know the full picture of what could be reused. Next slide, please. Other topics related to materials resource efficiency is very important, and through the different topics that I'm going to mention, this also affects, which is the bill of quantities. A very well-detailed bill of quantities, considering the different elements, could help to do the different assessments and the evaluation in the building. Sometimes the quotation, we know that are sensitive information. This information could be like manufacturer technical sheets, also in environmental product declarations, bill of material databases, or other experience that you may have with similar buildings. At the same time that there are different design considerations related to the selection of materials, this could help to reduce the associated waste. For example, considering the decision-making of the selection of materials, take-back schemes, because some manufacturers are starting to incorporate these take-back schemes due to the extended producer's responsibility. This could help to have closed-loop processes and with helping this long-term view of the whole life building approach. Next slide, please. Adaptation and resilience is also key to having in mind this future renovation, to consider the protection of occupier health and thermal comfort, integrating some passive strategies into the design that could directly reduce the overheating in the building, such as roof with vegetation, high reflectance surfaces. Also considering the structural and fabric resilience, the ability to increase the burden of weather, increase pressure and hazards associated with climate change, and also encourage the use of outdoor spaces, nature incorporation through landscaping and greenery, and also shading systems, water features, seating arrangements. This is also connected with well-being of the occupiers. And with this, during the design stage, a fluid dynamic approach could help to understand which is the microclimate and how to design these outdoor spaces. It is also highly recommended to have thermal comfort occupancy surveys from maybe similar buildings, or to have it then in the future post-occupancy, so that in the future renovation, this could be an input in which are the zones of the building that needs to be improved. Next slide, please. In the adaptation and resilience, it's also very important to understand which are going to be the climate change potential changes such as extreme weather, it is fully recommended to do and evaluate environmental features of the site in order to establish risk and mitigation measures, also emergency preparation planning, and implement passive survivability and backup power during these potential disruptions. Related also to sustainable drainage, there are different design measures that could be implemented to, in advance, avoid these disruptions related to climate change. For example, green infrastructure techniques that emulate sites' natural hydrology, like minimizing the amount of impervious hardscape areas and promoting infiltration at the same time. Next slide, please. And also to reduce cost, it's very important to consider this life cycle approach in two directions. The cost analysis through a life cycle approach, considering the cost with life cycle cost. There are different softwares in the market that could help to do this life cycle cost assessment. And also it's very important, as in the other aspects that I have mentioned, to have a very detailed bill of quantities that could help to do this type of to analysis of different alternatives, considering the whole life cycle approach. Sometimes some initial investments with higher cost could help in the overall life cycle of a building to reduce cost of maintenance and future renovation of different equipment. Also, in relation to that, this life cycle approach also help to do a life cycle assessment, considering the selection of materials and embodied carbon of the materials, and could contribute in the carbonization objectives. There are different in the web page of the EU levels. There are different life cycle assessment softwares that are in the market that could help also to do the methodology that is included in this indicator and implement this assessment. Next slide, please. And in order, we see in the beginning that we have two objectives in this case. One is the adaptation and low cost, but also to reduce the impact in sustainability. To reduce the impact, levels provides different aspects that could be considered during the design, and also to having in mind the future renovation, which is, for example, this use energy performance. It is very recommended to do an early sample box analysis and leave sufficient space for structural and future changes in the services. Next slide, please. Also considering water, as the same is in the different HVAC installations, leave sufficient space for future changes, and metering strategy for both energy, water, and different characteristics of the building that will help in the future to have an input in this future renovation and improvement of the building. Next slide, please. And finally, these health and well-being comfort issues that needs to be considered in the selection of materials. It is very recommended to do testing of indoor air quality, also to have this input in the future renovation about the different zones of the building that needs to be improved. And the next slide. The next two final slides are related to lighting and visual comfort and acoustics. And the lighting and visual is to be as flexible as possible during the lighting design, and also monitoring in order to identify these improvements in the future, and considering the daylight, but also the potential measures that could be prevent the negative effects. Next slide, and the last one. The acoustics. It's very important to have an acoustic plan to define different zones of the building depending on the needs, the loud zones, the quiet zones, and mixed zones, so that you can incorporate these measures during the design, but also during renovation. This could be adapted to future potential changes in uses. That's all, Katerina.
Thank you so much, Almudena, for that presentation. And that brings us to the round of questions that we can pose through all three speakers. So I also invite Evangelia, Lisette, and Almudena to all turn their cameras on. So we have them back with us for that little bit of discussion round there. Thanks, ladies. Now, maybe starting with the first presentation that we heard from Evangelia, there was a question in the chat in relation to future adaptability. So just checking with you, you mentioned that future adaptability was an important consideration, but could you maybe explain a little further how levels can support that?
Yeah, but I answered something quickly in the chat. For us, we also examined the indicator 2.3, which there is an overlap between many indicators in levels, and this is also the beauty of levels, because by examining something, you might think that you forget something outside, but it's not, because it's coming through another indicator. It is not. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to explain everything, and it is not on this table, but. It is basically, we're also examining the indicators 2.1, 2.2, and 2.4, which also supported our decision. But for the future adaptability, an important role is also the architectural design. So we wanted to be very careful when we put everything on the table together with our architects to have a design that could be extended in the future or could change with not internal separation walls, and also the structure and the use of the materials. So I hope it clarifies a bit.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of links. And also thank you for highlighting that there are many different angles that also levels looks at different processes. So thanks for that. And Modena, in the chat, it has been noted that actors generally respond to new building standards which address different risks by demolishing and focusing on new buildings. How levels potentially solve that problem or help to solve the problem?
Well, there are different indicators that are very focused in the adaptability, also in the construction. So it is important to start in the beginning of a new design that you incorporate some different measures like the assemblies of the different elements that could be separate in the future, not mix many elements in order to be reused. And also it's very, very important to I'm insisting so much in this bill of quantities and building information of the different elements of the building, because having in a database all the, like a catalog of the building where you have all the layers that you have and all the elements and materials that you have could help us to know in the future how to reuse it, maybe in another building or in the same building. It is very important to have the whole information.
And then also actively learn from it, right? So look at it, and then draw conclusions out of it. Yeah, no, thank you very much for that response. And Lisette, I was wondering, because a renovation focuses on the use phase emissions, right? But whole life carbon is also important consideration. So what's the next crucial step towards whole life carbon assessment by the industry from your perspective?
I think there are a few, actually. I think regulation will be extremely helpful to kind of give that clarity. And I think the levels is already there almost. It's making it required over a certain time frame. So I think that's very important. Awareness, obviously, is very important. And I think applying levels can then be very helpful to see what are the emissions in the different phases, because everybody has been so focused on the operational side of it. And obviously, if you renovate, you kind of either use more cement or steel or other materials. So it's extremely important to understand how much that is, and especially do the comparison. What if we would tear down the building and start again? Because then the real picture starts to come through on how much we waste, basically, that's already been spent in the past versus that incremental part. And then obviously you can make the distinction between the materials that still emit a lot of CO2, but it's actually less than you would have done if you would have built new, versus also seeing the alternative if you use more renewable materials. And I think giving people that transparency is extremely important. So it's not one thing. I think it's needed as a next step, but I think it's almost starts with regulation, because it puts everyone at the level playing field, and that's what we need if we really want to make impact.
Okay. And then maybe just to follow up, because you already touched upon it, but what in your eyes, and you mentioned regulation, but what could really help also with the adoption of levels in the next phases, Lisette?
I think creating awareness. I think those case studies are very good. I must admit that I wasn't very aware, working in the industry for many years, of levels. So I think marketing that and then putting it, I saw a few questions in the chat as well. How does it relate to building certifications? How does it relate to that? I think making that clear in terms of where does it fit in, what can it provide, and then work alongside the industry to show the benefit of it, I think is really important.
Yeah, no, yeah, it absolutely is. So definitely the awareness aspect. And I mean, as you one of the players in the industry, and you just you got to know it now. I think it's important that more actors will actually be made aware of it as well. Thanks, Lisette. Almudena, I think you were also highlighting, of course, the different steps, and also from the experience that you have. Maybe could you distill for our the attendees of this webinar, what's the key issues to consider when planning such a renovation project or future renovation, and maybe also what's the key challenges at the same time?
Well, I start with the challenges. I think that one of the major challenges is the resilience to change in our minds. This happens in all our aspects in our lives, but I think that to think outside of the box, it's very important, because we are used to do the things like that. We take an office and do the things like that, and then we incorporate in the past sustainability and well-being and these different aspects. But now we think that we should go one step further, that is to have a long-term view, which levels give that. The whole life approach, to see when you are doing the renovation and to doing the design stage step before, in order to incorporate the different measures to achieve the final objective, which is at the end efficient use of resources, low cost, and less impact. And levels could help to prioritize this in order to incorporate the different criteria that you may consider in the future. This is not a tendency right now. This is a reality in projects.
Okay. And how could levels maybe help prioritizing some of these points in planning for future renovations?
Yeah, levels is a very flexible tool that we have seen, that you can pick and choose whatever you need for your project. But also in this e-learning that we have, that Josefina was mentioning before, we have incorporated like a learning path that could help to identify which indicators are related to different priorities. If you are focusing on circularity, you have the different indicators that are more related: sustainable finance, resilience, global warming, or occupant quality. So depending on these prioritizations, you can take the indicators that are more focused in those topics. But they are all related also, as the other members.
Yeah. Which I think also, as Evangelia pointed out earlier, it's good, right, that they're all interrelated, because then you look at different things from different angles. Thank you, Almudena. Maybe turning to you again, Evangelia, because we were just talking about it, and also Almudena already responded to this prioritization, which I think is an important aspect, because you need to know where to focus on in the vast amount of information available. But looking at a project team that might consider renovation, or is in that design or in the decision phase, if you look at the assessment results of the indicators, where would you, or how would you think a project team could prioritize?
Yeah, it's not an easy answer. It's not straightforward. With our project team, with our stakeholders, we of course focus at the beginning to the design proposal. We focus on the design, and then we basically were a little bit separated at some point because we paid more attention for the LCA studies and the LCC studies and the environmental impact, and then examining different build-ups, we gave priorities to the materials we would like to use and how the construction and the renovation methods would be. But of course, it's not black or white. It's also the building, the output we want to have at the end, the look and feel is the content. So it's not, I mean, it's really nice to set a few benchmarks and then to go even beyond this benchmark. And this is the good thing again with levels, because it gives you free to prioritize what it is most important for you, and of course towards a sustainable design, not only for a state-of-the-art design.
No, very good. And maybe linked to that, because I think prioritization is, of course, a very important topic, where to start and what to focus on. But I'm sure also the audience would relate to the fact that, of course, the effort, time, as well as resources is an important aspect as well. So maybe to any of you three, but I would maybe start with Evangelia. What do you think is the additional effort required from the design team to implement levels fully, if you can? You can measure that, I don't know.
It is a big effort because we wanted to fully implement all the indicators. Maybe we left 1 to 3 out, but we wanted to fully implement all of them, and we started with the level 1, and now we're running the levels level 2. It is an effort, and especially if you wanted to do it in a co-creation way, which normally it is like that because we have the architects, we have the engineers, you have other stakeholders on the table, but what I find nice during this journey is that because it's something new, people, the stakeholders were eager to learn more and to deep a little bit, to dive into these results. Most of the indicators are very close to the national legislation, so it's not something new. It's not something levels is not. It is a different methodology maybe, but it's not something new. All the indicators have been there for years, and but it's nice because it is a tool that it can coordinate and it can lead to decision. It has a structure and it can be used.
Yeah, so it might actually really go then. Maybe as a wrap up to all three for this discussion round, are there any final tips for actors who've been listening today or might listen to the recording later and who are looking to apply levels for renovation projects? Anything from the top of your head? Maybe starting with Lisette, because you were the last talking. So any tips?
Yeah, my tip would be just to get started. And I was very, how do you say, made enthusiastic by the comment I heard earlier in terms of you can start with level 1. You don't have to do everything from the start. So don't get overwhelmed probably by what it can all provide. And you also commenting on what you just asked on what is the extra workload. I don't know, but having seen working with other certifications and other things, I think it may take time to get used to the methodology and the steps, etc. But I would imagine that a tool like Levels can really help approach things in a more structured way and provide that transparency. So maybe the advantage is not for one building where it takes more work, but the advantage is probably if you have a portfolio of buildings where all need to undergo renovation. If at the current rate we will definitely not make the deadline of 2050. So I would say there's the efficiency, the scale efficiencies and the advantages that come once you apply this and then apply it across a portfolio. And then I think it adds a lot of value because it also allows you to compare things with one another. So yeah, that's probably the tip.
No, very good. Yeah, as with many things, right? Once you know how to, it's easier to replicate it. So absolutely. No, thanks, Suzette. Amodeno, any tips from your side?
Well, I think it's very important. It's very different when you are starting a project since the beginning of the concept, where you can incorporate different topics, than when you are thinking of integrating different aspects when you are maybe during construction. No, so I think that the earlier everything is in the conversation and in the decision making is easier than to integrate, and the effort would be less because you are considering since the beginning different issues. And I think that more and more the different available certifications are being in line with levels and are having connections with them. And also levels provides you a way to understand which are the main concepts that are important to integrate without searching in many different places. So it provides this common framework for the whole Europe to understand which are the main topics that are important to include. So this is also less effort to start searching which is the most important in the different topics. But I think that for me the tips is to have an open mind and awareness of the different stakeholders that are participating in the project, to understand that this is important, that this is not something that, well, it is voluntary, but it is embedding different legislation and policies and future directives, that is becoming a reality. So we need to. This is not plan B. We are we need to incorporate everything now.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, as you said, it helps you, and all of you actually said that helps you structure it, but it also helps you in the first steps, right? To really to get started and get started well, and don't having to look around collecting things that you have to go all over the place, but it's in one place. And you have the information centralized. Thanks, Almudena. Lastly, of course, also turning back to you, Evangelia, on the tips that you might have for actors looking to use levels for renovation projects?
I think you said everything.
Mhm.
Yeah, just to start the earliest possible, for at least for the first time. So level 1 is a really helpful level of levels because even the client can understand what could be the requirement, what could be the priority for the project or the priorities. And in general, don't be afraid for the extra effort or the extra time, because the indicators are basically hidden in a way in the national legislation, in the design approach, in the architectural design itself. So it's a great tool to lead to decisions on environmental design choices. Of course, there are other tools, but this is something that can be used as a common language for all the member states.
Very good. Thanks to the three of you for not just your presentations, but also for answering the questions that came in from our audience. So thank you so much for joining today. Please, of course, stay for the wrap up, but thanks for the moment. We will now turn to wrapping up today's webinar, where I'm also going to invite back Josefina, who has kicked us off this morning, for some concluding remarks. So Josefina, what's your impression of the webinar today, and is there anything that we need to take forward?
Well, thanks. And thanks to the speakers. I think there were lots of really hands-on stuff I hope for the audience that it was interesting, that you are keen on looking closer at levels now and start trying it out. As speakers were saying, the level 1 is there to be used as a starter so that you can get a feel of what it is. I learned a lot as well, for sure, and it will be interesting to see how we can go on also in policy when it comes to looking at renovation projects and whole life carbon and all that. But that's another story than what we talked about today. But it's sort of tied in, yeah. So regardless of if you are working on new buildings or if you have a renovation project, I hope that today's webinar made you interested in trying out how levels can support you if you're interested in getting a better understanding of how your different choices will have an impact on the sustainability performance of that project. And I really liked what well, it was Imagelia who said, even the client can understand it. So I think that's the sort of the quote of the day, I believe. I also understood from the chat that there is lots of questions in relation to certification and how levels work with that. You mentioned it in the beginning, Katharina, but I want to reiterate it, that levels is not a certification scheme. It is not there to set benchmarks, or there's no such thing as levels plus or levels A or gold or something like that. It is rather there for a project that wants to, on its own, without necessarily having it third-party verified and so on, wanting to have a better understanding of how different choices that they make along the project, what kind of impacts that have. Now, as I mentioned in my presentation, a lot of certification schemes active in the EU have been involved in developing and testing levels, and they are now aligning themselves with levels. We had a very nice webinar on that just very recently. So you can indeed look at old recording. I think it's being put to you again in the chat. So have a look at that, because it goes in more detail into certification and how levels links to that. We also have, not a very old one, but still something what has happened in the past, a webinar on decarbonization, where we talk about whole life carbon, and that was just in December, I think. So there is a recording of that as well, which is available, and I'm sure colleagues will have already, or will put it in the chat as well, the link to that, because these were questions that came up during this webinar as well. I want to thank everybody who was listening to us. I want to stress that we are really keen on having your feedback on this webinar. There is a link to that so that you can give us your views on what happened today, but perhaps also put in something of what you would like us to cover next. We've had lots of webinars in the last year, and we will continue to develop these kinds of events of different sorts. So if there's any particular topic that you feel would be that we should tackle, let us know. But in particular, otherwise, give us feedback on today's event, because we really take them into consideration when we go further and do new work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Josefina, for these concluding words, and also for pointing towards different ways for you to engage, which is first and foremost, of course, the survey that Josefina just mentioned, so for your reflection and your feedback, but of course also pointing you towards the other webinars that have been recorded and that are available. I want to conclude the round of thank you. So thank you to all the speakers for their great presentations today, as well as for being available to answer the questions that came in from our audience. I want to thank you as the participants for actively contributing your questions and being around for the webinar today. I hope this webinar has exceeded, or at least fulfilled your expectations. And for that, thank you again for attending today's event. I also want to thank the European Commission and obviously the colleagues in the background organizing these levels webinars, and specifically, of course, the colleagues from ECOS there. We wish you a lovely rest of the day, and please, if you have not done so, join the Levels LinkedIn group, because there you get a lot of inside information and also the newest information to available materials, as well as these webinars. So thank you so much for today, and of course we hope to see you back in future events. Thank you so much.